Hey folks, today we're doing a video on the Reflex Lab. So a reflex, by definition, is a rapid, automatic, predictable response to a stimulus. So in this case, a stimulus might be a pin poking your skin. Then the response would be muscle contraction to jerk away from that painful stimulus. Now, we describe the anatomy of reflexes as something called a reflex arc. And there are 5 basic components to a reflex arc. There is a receptor, which is what detects the stimulus. Then there is a sensory neuron, which is the blue guy here, taking information from the site of the stimulus to the CNS, in this case the spinal cord, but of course it could be the brain as well. By the way, notice that this sensory neuron is depicted correctly as being a unipolar neuron here. Now, in this case, the gray matter of our spinal cord is functioning as the integration center where we process that information. Now, here we have a neuron called an interneuron because it's in between the sensory and motor neuron that's doing that processing, but we don't always have to have this. Next to finally, we've got the motor neuron leaving the ventral horn of the spinal cord here, coming out to the effector. The effector is our last component. The effector is what's going to cause the action that consists of the response. So these are my 5 basic components of my reflex arc. Now, what we can also do is describe reflex arcs in different ways. So they can be cranial or spinal, first of all. And what we're asking here is the integration happening in the brain, that would be cranial, or in the spinal cord, that would be spinal. Next, is it mono or polysynaptic? So like how many gray matter neurons do we have? Okay, how many gray matter neurons do we have? And we'll count the gray matter synapses. If there's 1 gray matter synapse, it's a monosynaptic reflex. If there are 2 gray matter synapses, it is a polysynaptic reflex. And then we can look at the effector and decide, is it an autonomic reflex or somatic? So if the reflex is skeletal muscle, it's a somatic reflex. And if the reflex is something else like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, or a gland, that would be an autonomic reflex. And then lastly, you can look at where the stimulus and the response are. Are they on the same side of the body? That would be an ipsilateral reflex. Or are they on opposite sides? That would be a contralateral reflex. So let's back up here and take a look at this guy here. So my integration is happening in the spinal cord, so this reflex is definitely going to be spinal. And when I look at this gray matter, here's my gray matter in my spinal cord. When I look at my gray matter, how many gray matter synapses do I have? Well, I got 1, 2. So 2 is definitely more than 1. So this is a polysynaptic reflex. And then I can ask myself, what about the effector? Well, this effector down here, this is skeletal muscle. That's what skeletal muscle looks like. And so if it's skeletal muscle as your effector, it is going to be a somatic reflex. Then finally, notice that the stimulus, sensory neuron going in, and motor neuron going out to the effector, it's all on the same side here. So because it's all on the same side, this would be considered an ipsilateral reflex. Okay, good job on that. Hopefully that made sense to you. One of the reflexes we're going to do in class, in lab, is the stretch reflex, where we strike the patellar ligament, which connects the tibial tuberosity on the tibia to the patella. And we strike with that little reflex hammer. And striking it causes a stretch in the quadriceps muscle. There is a receptor called a muscle spindle in there whose job it is to measure muscle stretch. And when we stretch that muscle, it's going to send a signal via this sensory neuron, unipolar, goes into the spinal cord. That's where we're doing our integration. The integration is happening at the synapse here, and we just have one gray matter synapse. And then we're taking a motor neuron out to the quadriceps muscle, which is our effector. All right, so notice that this is a spinal reflex because the cord is doing the integration. My integration center is right here. I have a single gray matter synapse, so it is a monosynaptic reflex. We're striking, the right knee here, and the right leg is kicking out. And so it's ipsilateral. And my quadriceps muscle, which is my effector, that's a skeletal muscle. So this is a somatic reflex. So we're going to do this one in lab, play around with it a little bit. Oops. Another important reflex, we're not actually going to test this one in lab, but it is good to know, is the withdrawal reflex. This is actually also the same reflex we had in slide number 1. We got a stimulus, pain from the heat, and then sensory neuron takes that information in, comes into the gray matter. I don't quite love the way they made this sensory neuron go in. It should be going into like the dorsal horn here. And then we got 1, 2 synapses, and then out to the biceps brachii muscle here for our withdrawal response. So this is a spinal reflex. This is a polysynaptic reflex, ipsilateral, as well as being somatic because this is a skeletal muscle. Another reflex we got to know about is something called the cross-extensor reflex. Now in this example, we got a dude in some short shorts. I think it's a dude, a person in some short shorts, stepping on a tack with their right foot. Now their right foot that stepped on the tack is going to do a withdrawal reflex, but at the same time you have a reflexive contraction of the extensor muscles on the left lower limb here. And that part of that reflex where we have extension of the opposite limb, and we can see how the interneuron sends signals across to the other side, that is called the cross-extensor reflex. And that is an example of a polysynaptic reflex. The cross-extensor, it is polysynaptic, but that is an example of a contralateral reflex. There we go. So it is, I wanted to show you this one because it's good to see a contralateral reflex. The stretch reflex with the patella was withdrawal. I can't talk today. The stretch reflex with the patella was ipsilateral. The withdrawal reflex was ipsilateral. We finally get a contralateral reflex as well. All right. Another reflex we're going to do is the pupillary reflex. So where we shine a light into the eyes, we're shining a light into the right eye, and the right eye's pupil is going to constrict. Because the light is so bright, we're going to try and reduce the brightness. Okay? So when this right eye gets light in it, we got sensory information going back. We got a lot of synapses going on, so definitely polysynaptic. Now my reflex is happening in my midbrain, so this is a cranial reflex. And if I'm shining light in the right eye and I'm observing the right eye to constrict, it's going to be ipsilateral. This is an autonomic one. Well, that's a new example for us as well. This is an autonomic reflex because the muscle in the iris, in your eye, that is going to be made of smooth muscle, which we don't control. So that is considered an autonomic reflex. So we're going to play with this one in lab too. And that's pretty much it. So make sure you know your definitions here, definition of a reflex, all the components. Make sure you could label those components. Make sure you could describe a reflex in terms of the 4 characteristics. Either if I named it, like if I said, patellar reflex, you should be able to tell me all the things about it. Or if I gave you a diagram of a reflex, you should be able to look at it, then classify it as, somatic, autonomic, ipsi, contralateral, mono, polysynaptic, etc. And that's pretty much it. This is a really short video. This is a really quick and easy lab as well. As always, reach out if you've got any questions. See ya next time.